A political violence hearing just turned into a moment of stunning hypocrisy. Michael Knowles confronted Senator Cory Booker about endorsing a Virginia AG candidate who called for murdering Republicans and their children, then watched Booker flee the room when challenged. This wasn't just political theater. It was a masterclass in exposing how violence rhetoric gets a pass when it comes from the right side.
Thank you to each of you for being here today, and to our law enforcement that is here. We thank you for your service. Mr. Knowles, I do want to come to you, and it is wonderful to have you here with us today, and we appreciate that you're a Nashville resident, have been there for several years now, and I want to return to the topic of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And one of the things that was quite disturbing to me was quotes that came from activist professors. And we had in Tennessee 3 professors that made just horrendous statements. 2 have been terminated. 1 is going through a termination hearing at this point. An assistant dean at MTSU posted on Facebook, "Looks like old Charlie spoke his fate into existence. Hate begets hate. Zero sympathy." There was an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee, and their post referenced Charlie Kirk, and it was, "The world is better off without him in it, even those who are claiming to be sad for his wife and kids. His kids are better off living in a world without a disgusting psychopath like him and his wife." And then an English professor at Cumberland University posted on Facebook, "Crying about a Nazi getting shot while staying silent about the school shooting in Colorado today is peak Republican." Now, I believe that people that praise violence should not be anywhere near our children. I do not know of a parent that wants their child to be receiving instruction from an individual who glorifies and applauds brutal murder and the murder of a husband, a father, the murder of someone who believes, like me, that our nation has been kept free because we believe in robust, respectful, bipartisan debate. And I would like for you to talk for just a minute about what is happening in higher education and the role that seems to be playing in some of this violence and violent rhetoric.
I think you make a marvelous point, Senator. You cannot possibly expect a parent to send their children to a school where the professors might endeavor to kill half the students. It would be like going to a restaurant with the assumption that the waiters want to poison half the customers or something like that. You can't go to a hospital where the nurses want to kill half the patients. It's just, you cannot operate a society that way. That is obviously beyond the pale. And if you are to permit that kind of speech into the marketplace of ideas, it doesn't have the effect of expanding the marketplace of ideas. It actually shrinks the marketplace of ideas. This is why the First Amendment obviously prohibits things like direct threats or obscenity or fighting words, because these are forms of speech that actually undermine rational discourse. I think Senator Booker made a good point just a moment ago when he said we have to self-examine, we have to be introspective. And I can't help but think of a line today. Jay Jones has the vision, commitment, and integrity to keep families safe and make sure every Virginian gets a fair shake in the justice system. I'll be working every day to ensure Jay wins this race. That's the endorsement of Senator Booker for a man who would seek to be the Attorney General of Virginia. This is a man who, if people have not been reading the news, has called for a Republican to be murdered, for his children to be murdered, for the children to die in their mother's arms in order to persuade the Republican to change his policy views, and a man who says that he would urinate on the graves of multiple Republicans. Senator Booker, in this spirit of introspection, is standing by this endorsement. So I suppose I would invite, well, perhaps I should have looked, because Senator Booker has left the room, and I think I can guess why. Senator Booker, I think, should practice what he preaches, because this is the kind of moment. You cannot have a professor who wants to teach students and is going to desire to kill half of them. You certainly cannot have law enforcement officers who would engage in this kind of violent rhetoric against half of their constituents. So long as anyone stands by an endorsement such as that, their words are meaningless. They are shedding crocodile tears on the topic of political violence.
I find it just so astounding that we have professors that continue to be in classrooms and hold such views as I put on the posters behind me, and that parents are then having to address those issues with their kids. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
What Michael Knowles did in that hearing room wasn't just political gotcha theater. It was a surgical exposure of how institutions handle violence rhetoric when it serves their purposes versus when it threatens them. The moment Senator Booker left the room, rather than defend his endorsement, revealed something deeper than partisan hypocrisy. It showed how moral authority collapses when confronted with its own contradictions. The hearing began with Knowles addressing disturbing statements from Tennessee professors celebrating political assassination. An MTSU assistant dean posted, "Hate begets hate, zero sympathy." A UT professor declared, "The world is better off without him," and called the victim a disgusting psychopath. A Cumberland University English professor mocked concerns about a Nazi getting shot. These aren't abstract policy disagreements. They're educators tasked with shaping young minds actively celebrating murder. Knowles correctly identified this as a foundational crisis. You cannot operate educational institutions where faculty want to eliminate half their students based on political beliefs. The metaphor he used was precise. Imagine restaurants where waiters want to poison half the customers, or hospitals where nurses target half the patients. Such institutions would collapse instantly. Yet universities continue operating under exactly this dynamic. Knowles referenced First Amendment doctrine that distinguishes protected speech from speech that undermines rational discourse itself. Direct threats, fighting words, and incitement to violence receive no constitutional protection, precisely because they destroy the marketplace of ideas rather than expanding it. This distinction matters in academic settings. Universities claim to foster critical thinking and open debate, but faculty celebrating political murder creates what legal scholars call a chilling effect. Students self-censor not from intellectual rigor, but from fear their professors view them as legitimate targets. Then Knowles deployed his rhetorical precision instrument, Booker's endorsement of J. Jones for Virginia Attorney General. The tiding was surgical. Booker had just finished calling for self-examination and introspection about political violence. Jones had publicly called for a Republican to be murdered, specifically advocating for the politician's children to die in their mother's arms to change policy positions. Jones also stated he would urinate on the graves of multiple Republicans. This wasn't ancient history or taken out of context remarks. These were explicit, detailed fantasies of political violence from someone seeking to become Virginia's top law enforcement officer. And Booker, after delivering remarks about introspection and examining violent rhetoric, maintained his endorsement. Knowles identified the core institutional failure: selective enforcement of moral standards. Academic institutions terminate some professors for celebrating violence while protecting others. Politicians condemn violent rhetoric while endorsing candidates who exemplify it. This selective application doesn't just undermine credibility, It signals that violence rhetoric is acceptable when it serves institutional purposes. Knowles wasn't just exposing individual hypocrisy. He was demonstrating how institutions normalize violence through bureaucratic doublespeak. University administrators claim they're fostering difficult conversations while protecting faculty who eliminate conversation entirely. Political leaders invoke healing while endorsing candidates who promise vengeance. When institutions selectively condemn violence based on political utility, they're not maintaining standards, they're weaponizing them. The message becomes unmistakable. Violence rhetoric is wrong when it threatens institutional power, acceptable when it serves institutional goals. This creates a permission structure where politically useful violence gets rational, while inconvenient violence gets condemned. The practical consequences extend far beyond political point scoring. Students in these professors' classrooms face hostile learning environments where their fundamental humanity is questioned. Citizens and jurisdictions, led by officials who fantasize about political murder, have legitimate concerns about equal protection under law. When societies normalize political violence rhetoric through institutional protection, they create escalation dynamics. If professors can celebrate assassination without consequences, if attorneys general can threaten murder without disqualification, the boundaries of acceptable behavior shift dramatically toward actual violence. Knowles's confrontation suggests institutional remedies. Universities need consistent standards for faculty conduct, regardless of political orientation. Professional licensing boards should consider whether violence rhetoric disqualifies candidates for positions requiring public trust. But the deeper solution is cultural. Institutions must choose between protecting principles and protecting preferences. When Booker left the room, rather than address his endorsement, he demonstrated Knowles's point. Moral authority requires moral consistency. Leaders who preach introspection while avoiding it, who condemn violence while endorsing it, reveal that their principles are purely instrumental. That retreat reflects institutions that have lost the capacity for principled self-correction. When leaders cannot address their own contradictions, they forfeit the moral standing necessary to address society's contradictions. Knowles forced that question into the open. Booker's response provided the answer.